Okay, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about question number 4 from my sheet. But before we get to that, I understand Mr. Cooley took some offense or umbrage or something to the length of my video. He thought it was too long for him. And, if Mr. too long for Mr. Cooley, I guess that's a problem. I just didn't know he had an issue with length. So I'm not going to get into that. I go as long as I can, and yeah, I just really want to try and get the girth of the material in there, and so I don't know. I don't really have a response to Mr. Cooley, and we'll just do our own thing, and so I really want to talk about. I want to start before I start on that though. On question 4, I wanted to show you guys a video since you guys aren't in the classroom. Involving Bill Belichick, who we see here. I talked about him in my last group of slides as the great coach he is. And I found this clip that I thought really kind of brought together the idea of prudence. And I want to see if I can pull it up here. Really brings up the idea of prudence in what we're trying to talk about here. So let's see. Give it 1 second to start playing.
Do is create different situations, keep them alert, keep them thinking. Be alert, good speed, concentrate on what we're doing, and be ready for the situations, okay? And I don't want to hear about what any of the situations are. You just play them. Got it? Well, I'm just telling you, be ready for anything now. I'm ready for anything. I mean, 2nd and 15 or what, be ready for anything. I'm ready for it. Okay. Water. Expecting rain. It'll be easier in a game than it is in practice. Expecting rain, Coach. We're expecting rain. What are you guys thinking about right here? 6 seconds. Getting out of bounds. Scramble. Ready for the scramble, okay? If he doesn't have it, we're going to scramble, keep it alive, and toss it up there, okay? What's going to happen if the offense jumps offside? Ball's on a 1-yard line. Half the distance of the goal. How far is that? About this far. Right? Ball's on a 1-yard line. Half the distance of the goal, they get penalized 2 inches. So why not try to draw you guys offside, right? That's the cheapest 5 yards they can get. That's the situation. They're backed up. You got to be ready for a hard cadence that gets them off the goal line. All right? If they miss it, what do they got to lose? Nothing. 2 inches. They're on a 1-yard line anyway. Okay? Situations.
So Bill Belichick is talking situations, and what we want to talk about here is, and that's exactly what prudence is about seeing the situation. So when we see an injustice in the world, how do we solve that? How do we fix it? That's how we fix it. That's how we express justice. When we see a fire and we want to run in and save everyone, is it a good idea? What's the situation? Where are we being courageous, or where are we expressing the virtue of fortitude? If we want to eat a burger, is it the right situation? If we're drinking alcohol, how much is the right amount to drink? What is temperance? And that's why, as Mr. Cooley talked about, prudence is the charioteer of all the virtues. And even going deeper, how do we affect the virtues? What shows us the best path? All right. With charity, is it a charity that actually gives money to the people they're doing, or is it a charity that raises money and pays all of it to the employees, the overhead? It's a balance between two extremes. What's actually virtuous? Remember the guy taking his son to college. Is he spoiling the kid or being generous when he gives him money? Or is he teaching him the value of money, or is he hanging him out to dry when he doesn't give him money? Where is the virtue? And then the third level was, the balance between our priorities. So many good activities, so many things we can do in our life, but there's only 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We gotta know the situation. All right. So like Coach Belichick saying there, if it's 3rd and 1 from the goal line, don't be afraid to risk jumping offside, because if you get the offense offside, they are now no longer on the goal line. They're 5 yards off. But if it's 3rd and 1 from the 50-yard line, you better not be jumping off sides. You better not get that neutral grown and backs in, because that's it's a free first down for them, and they get a new set of downs. Know the situation. All right. So we're going to move into question 4, which is the question here is, why is prudence a communal activity? All right. But the first thing actually we have to look at, since knowing the situation is important, we might want to ask first the question, is intelligence an advantage? All right. Are only smart people, wicked smart people, are they the only ones who are virtuous? All right. And if we're talking about book smart, the answer is no. And the example I want to use here, and actually I have his statue right here with me, St. John Vianney. St. John Vianney is the patron saint of priests, all right, of parish priests. He was a parish priest in Ars, France. He was a pastor for something like 48 years in the same parish. And he's one of the holiest men, one of the most virtuous men to ever be a priest. And yet he was not that smart. He actually almost flunked out of seminary. He could not pass his Latin classes. And back then, the Mass and all the sacraments were in Latin. All right. He didn't have great intellectual capacity, but what he did have was in here. And he had the virtues, both the human virtues and the theological virtues. So, no, you don't need to be book smart in order to do that. But the question is not so much the theoretical knowledge and the handling of big concepts and words, but rather a practical shrewdness and a common sense in the matters of human behavior. So God's not going to love you any less or have less use for you because you happen to have been born with a very second-rate brain. All right. John Vianney, patron saint of priest. God used him for many great things. God used him to bring many people back into the church through the great sacrament of confession. And he was no intellectual genius. Right? And we've seen that in many of the saints and many other non-saints, many virtuous people in the history of the world. They were not geniuses in the classroom. All right. Now, Jesus says this in the gospel. He said, I'm sending you, behold, I'm sending you like sheep in the midst of the wolves. So be shrewd as serpents and simple as doves. It does not say be a genius at math. It does not say know your history. It simply says be shrewd as serpents and simple as doves. Be virtuous. And remember, in the gospels, who does Jesus go after the most? The Pharisees. He can't stand the Pharisees. I won't say he hated the Pharisees, as God didn't hate anyone, but he attacked them mercilessly. And those guys were the smartest guys on the street. They knew the Old Testament backward and forward. They knew every letter of the law, whether it was the moral law, the temple laws, or the kingdom laws. They knew every single letter of it, and they enforced it without any patience or any desire. And that's why Christ went after them, because they were so smart. First of all, they couldn't see Christ for God. They couldn't see that Christ was God despite their intelligence, because they were so blacked up in their vices. All right. So in the sense of book smart, no. The key is not how much intelligence or how much sense you have, but rather that you use whatever sense you have, whatever intelligence you do can have, to its fullest capacity. Whatever sense you have, you must use it. And we're going to see this again when we get to conscience in about 2 questions. All right. But the key is, as I said, no slacking off. You have to really go through it hard. All right. Now, no stupid person can be good. All right. We're not talking about someone with less intelligence. We're talking about someone who's unreasonable, someone who's pig-headed, someone who's a bigot, someone who's practicing self-deception. Because all those things are blameworthy. That's what the stupid person is. Again, a stupid person isn't someone who just doesn't have the intellectual capacity of most other people. The stupid person engaging in these things. And the unreasonableness, the pig-headedness, the bigotry, the self-deception, as I said, it's blameworthy and a constitutive of the kind of stupidity that enters into vice. Why? Because they are inaccurate grasps of the way things really are in the world. Okay? The pig-headed person is someone, who thinks they're always right. Well, you're not always right. Okay? You can make mistakes. If you believe people of other races are beneath you, right? That's bigotry. And that's not how the world is. All right. And so refusing to see that you might be wrong in your perception of how the world is, that's self deception. That's deceiving yourself of how the world is. And so there's a certain humility that's required to overcome that. But the stupid person can't do that. That has nothing to do with your intellectual capacity. It has to do with what's going on here. But that being said, there is a sense of education, different from common sense, different from a natural common sense, but there is a sense of education in which the educated person does indeed have a moral advantage over the uneducated. And if this were not so, I mean, then there'd be no point in education. We might not, why bother going to school? Why bother learning anything? Right? Aristotle would say that the young can never fully be wise. Why? Because wisdom and what we get education requires life experience. All right. We have to, excuse me, we have to have life experience for three things. First of all, we have to learn how to behave. All right. Life experience teaches how to behave in polite society, how to behave with our friends. All right. So we got the toddler here who's, he's probably on the playground. He doesn't want to go home. He's pulling a temper tantrum. All right. That's not how a good, virtuous person behaves. He doesn't know any better. He's a toddler, but he needs to learn. Think about too, like the little toddler in the house who runs around. You're having a house party with your friends or something, and your 2-year-old kid gets away from the babysitter or from your wife who trains him, and he's running through the house naked. Right? We see kids doing that. Right? No, it's not a good thing for us to run around the house naked. If I start running around Henderson naked, lock me up and give me soft in a soft room with soft food. I've gone crazy. All right. But the toddler does that. They haven't learned yet that that's not how you behave in adult world. The second is that there are consequences to our actions. All right. We need to learn that. All right. This guy's going to learn very quickly the consequence of pumping a 12 gauge shotgun into a hornet's nest. All right. If you go find a video online, I didn't show the video. It's not pretty. All right. There's a consequence to this action. He's a little old to be learning that consequence, but he's learning it. But think about like the kid who touches the hot stove. All right. He's learning there's a consequence to his action. Or what even a bee's nest, a child who goes up to a bee's nest not knowing what it is and starts touching it or playing with it, he's going to get stung. He's learning there are consequences to action. All right. That's a second thing that we learn from life experience. And the third thing we learn is our priorities. That there's a priority of importance. And we've gone over this in multiple different parts of our lessons, that triangle of priorities. Hopefully, God at the top, your family, your country, whatever else is in there, your schoolwork, everything else you need. All right, we have priorities. And so life experience shows us that, as I said, going back to children don't understand priorities. They don't get that yet. They don't get that, helping mom and dad do the chores is more important than playing another round in their video games. Their priorities are off whack. Why? Because they haven't matured enough. They don't have the wisdom, as Aristotle would say. All right. So the three things our life experiences teaches us how to behave, how to foresee consequences, and how to determine what's really important. And we need all three to be prudent. Okay. So as we're coming to the actual answer for question number 4 is, how is prudence a communal activity? Well, practical decision making is excuse me, as a spelling error there, as much a communal activity as it is an individual one. And in the obvious sense, all right, we can look at how when we have a situation that we need to be prudent about, oftentimes we consult other people for guidance. All right. And that guidance shapes how we act, the decisions we make. All right. We ask around what's the best thing to do. All right. What's the best route to achieve this objective? What is virtuous in this scenario? And maybe even asking people to help us bring it forward. Okay, that's prudence. So that's the obvious sense already, but there's a deeper sense, right? There is a deeper sense to how we see the way things are and thus act is deeply shaped by our formative communities, things like our family, our faith group, our schools, our society, our little communities. All right. So how we raise our children. Remember the mother from the last section, question 2. Remember the mother who's raising her child the wrong way. Well, why is she making all these mistakes? Maybe it's a good chance her mother didn't raise her well. All right. You see that unfortunately more so in fathers. Typically fathers and sons. If you have a bad father-son relationship, that father probably had a bad relation with his father. It tends to be not genetic, obviously, but it tends to go down. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, unfortunately. All right. So how we raise our children often reflects how we were raised. And sometimes it's actually the opposite, though. Maybe if our parent was so horrible, we work so hard to be a better parent. So it can flip too. It's not always determinative. All right. Another one, how our communities treat different races, different cultures, different religions affects how we see them. All right. And usually, so we've talked about this in the class session. And so, like, if you grew up in 1950 Jim Crow South, you're going to see people of African American descent a lot differently than if you grew up in 2020 Warwick, Rhode Island. Now, we're not perfect today, but it's a lot better. All right. You're going to understand the dignity and respect that every single person deserves, despite the color of their skin, despite the religion they worship. But again, you grew up in Protestant South in 1950s time or even earlier, you're probably not going to understand that very well. All right. Excuse me. And finally, another way is how we approach God. How do we approach our faith? All right. The community we were formed in. All right. Someone who grows up a Muslim is probably going to practice the Muslim faith in their adulthood. Someone whose parents bring them to Catholic Mass every Sunday is probably going to be going to Mass every Sunday as an adult, or at least regularly. They're going to feel like they need to be going to Mass regularly. The families who don't practice any faith, that's what I tell my families when they come for baptism. I say, if you practice your faith, your kids who you're having baptized will practice faith. But if you don't pray, if you don't go to Mass, your kids are not going to go to Mass. It's kind of a monkey see, monkey do situation. All right. So our communities influence um, how we see the world and what priorities we give it. That's why prudence is a communal activity. How we see things the way they are and thus act is deeply shaped by our formative communities. All right, the communities that form us. And it can be for better or for worse. All right, as I mentioned, there are some things that are great. It's great if your family's bringing you to church every week, and that formed a habit of you going to church. And it formed the prudential judgment that, I need to be going to church. I need to put God high up in my life. But it can be worse. As I said, growing up in Jim Crow South, all right, that community is going to form you possibly with racial intentions. But the good thing is when it goes down the worst side, it's not necessarily deterministic. All right, we can change. And we've talked about that in many sessions before. Um, so, so the more importance of education, getting back into education a little bit, in a narrow formal sense, going to school, taking your actual classes, don't really have a lot to do with the actual virtue. All right. Whether or not, as I said with John Vianney, or whether or not you know the Latin conjugation of a verb, probably isn't going to determine how virtuous you are. Whether or not you can find you can do, trigonometry well, it's probably not going to determine how virtuous you are. But in a broader informal sense, the experience of our education is crucial for virtue. And that's why, for example, your parents spend, I think it's $16,500 to send you to Hendricken, all right? Because you can learn mathematics from any public school teacher. You can learn science from any public school teacher. You can learn history from any public school teacher. You can learn it at LaSalle. You can learn it at Prout. But the Hendricken experience is that you learn your mathematics from a virtuous teacher like Mr. Morey. And you learn your physics from a virtuous teacher like Mr. Johnston. And you learn your history from a virtuous teacher like Mrs. Lynch. And so forth and so on. The experience that they bring to the classroom and Hendricken, rooted in our Christian faith, okay, and the virtues that come from that, form you in a different way than you would if you were learning the same exact academic lessons in the public school you would have gone to, or even, as I said, some other private schools. We'll stop it there. We won't go further than that. But that's the Hendrickian experience, and that's the broad sense. That's the broad sense of education that shows us how our families, our communities, and our society see the world and live out that vision. All right. So how our community that we grow up in, how they see sex, how they see alcohol use, how they see eating habits will model, how they see the model, excuse me, will shape those in our lives. All right, for temperance. And how we see a treatment of the poor, a treatment of children, other races, shaped our capacity for justice. All right, that's the growth in prudence. That's why education is the most powerful tool for growth in virtue, and especially our communal education. And this is why prudence is a communal activity, because our communities, number one, pass on truthful or deceiving ways of seeing the world, and two, they help us to weed out the falsities we encounter. So um, that's going to sum up. That's why prudence is a communal activity. That's the importance of education in prudence. All right, you don't have to be a genius, academic genius, to be a good person, but you do have to be able to use the wisdom that you do have and experience that you do have, and you grow in that experience from your communities, so the communities you choose to act in, and sometimes the communities you're put in, and you hope that they help you and grow in virtue. So that answers question number 4. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it wasn't too long for Mr. Cooley. Um, the next one, Mr. Cooley's going to come back for question number 5. He's going to talk about the sub-virtues of prudence.